China's yuan is at a 16-year low, and the country appears to be experiencing deflation.
Expectation is you're going to continue to see China's economy struggle.
What if I told you that there's an economy where consumers refuse to spend money, property markets are crashing, youth unemployment is skyrocketing, and yet this same economy is experiencing what experts are calling a second economic miracle? Welcome to modern China, an economy so bizarre that it's breaking every rule in the economics textbook. While Chinese families are saving over 40% of their income, 8 times more than Americans, Chinese factories are somehow producing more than ever before, dominating everything from electric vehicles to green technology. Today, we're diving deep into China's increasingly strange economy. We'll uncover how a nation built on savings and investment is now trapped by its own success, and why this economic paradox could reshape the entire global economy. Stick around, because what's happening in China right now has never been seen before in economic history. The foundation of China's economic model. To understand China's bizarre boom, we need to go back to where it all began. In the 1980s, China wasn't trying to create a consumer paradise, it was trying to survive. When Deng Xiaoping opened China's doors to market reforms in 1978, the country's GDP per capita was less than $200. Even adjusted for inflation, this would make China one of the poorest countries in the world today. Unlike other developing nations that could afford to dream about shopping malls and consumer goods, China had to focus on one thing: catching up. This created what economists call an investment-heavy economic miracle. Just like Japan did in the 1960s and 70s, China used its banks to invest on a colossal scale. The strategy was simple but effective. Keep wages and currency low to become a manufacturing powerhouse, then use the profits to build infrastructure, factories, and education systems. And it worked spectacularly. In just 30 years, China lifted over 800 million people out of poverty. That's almost 15% of the world's entire population. Villages became factory towns became megacities, and China became the backbone of global supply chains. But here's where things get interesting. While Americans were saving just 5% of their income, Chinese families were saving over 50%. This wasn't because they wanted to, it was because the entire economic system was designed around investment, not consumption. The housing bubble solution. Now, every economist knows that investment-heavy growth has limits. Eventually, you have enough bridges, roads, and factories. At that point, a healthy economy needs to transition to consumption-based growth, where people actually spend money on goods and services. But there's a problem with this transition. It requires taking power away from the industrial elites who benefited from the previous model. In China's case, many of these industrialists are high-ranking members of the Communist Party. They weren't exactly eager to give up their privileged position. So China chose a different path, one that seemed to solve everything without requiring painful political changes. They blew a massive housing bubble. Here's how it worked. First, they removed conservative regulations that prevented the housing market from taking off. Second, they made it easier for banks to supply mortgages to households. Then they sat back and watched as a positive feedback loop made everyone feel rich. As more households borrowed to speculate on housing, prices went up. Rising prices made homeowners feel wealthier, encouraging them to borrow and spend even more. Banks were happy to lend because houses only seemed to go up in value. This housing bubble allowed China to sustain high economic growth well after most productive investments were completed. By 2010, construction made up nearly half of Chinese GDP growth. The constant building cycle kept money circulating throughout the economy, even with weak household spending. The inevitable crash. As we all know, bubbles eventually burst, and when they do, the virtuous cycle becomes a doom loop. It began in 2021 with the collapse of Evergrande, one of the titans of Chinese real estate. For years, this company had symbolized China's boom, but beneath the surface was over $300 billion in debt. When it defaulted, the fallout was immediate. Tens of thousands of families were left with unfinished apartments. Projects froze mid-construction, and for the first time in decades, property prices began to fall. The one asset the middle class believed was untouchable, their home, had become a liability. Banks started demanding their money back. Consumers couldn't fully repay their loans and stopped spending. Reduced home values meant banks stopped lending to anyone. This is exactly what happened to Japan in the 1990s, leading to decades of economic stagnation. But here's where China's story takes a bizarre turn. Instead of following Japan into a prolonged recession, something unprecedented happened. While Chinese consumers stopped spending and the property market collapsed, Chinese manufacturing didn't just survive, it exploded. China's second economic miracle. This is where China's economy becomes truly weird. In a normal economy, when consumers stop spending, factories lose orders and start cutting production. But China is no normal economy. According to research by Professor Bert Hoffman from the National University of Singapore, as Chinese banks stepped back from real estate, they started pumping massive amounts of money into industry. This is the key difference with Japan and Western economies. China's state is so much more powerful. After the housing bubble burst, the government essentially ordered its state-owned banks to pivot hard and turn on the lending taps to industries it considered essential for economic development. With so much state support, Chinese manufacturers gained a significant edge over foreign firms. Of course, Chinese consumers were still in trouble, so factories couldn't sell all this new production at home. This is why we're seeing deflation in China. But with massive state backing, Chinese export growth absolutely exploded. The numbers are staggering. China now dominates advanced industries like electric vehicles, clean technology, and even AI. Last year, it was again the second fastest growing major economy in the world. We're witnessing what can only be called China's second economic miracle. The demographic time bomb. But this miracle comes with a dark side that threatens to unravel everything. China is facing a demographic crisis that's quietly killing its economy from within. By 2040, more than 25% of China's population will be over 60. That's hundreds of millions of elderly citizens with a shrinking working-age population to support them. And here's the thing, older populations tend to save more and spend less. This demographic shift is already changing behavior. Younger families are saving to care for aging parents, while elderly citizens are holding on to cash for retirement and healthcare. All of this means less money flowing through the economic machine. But the real problem isn't just the aging population, it's the lack of confidence in the system. China's welfare state is extremely weak. Health insurance is limited, public pensions are modest, and there's little structural support for people to spend with confidence. This has created enormous pressure on young people. Rather than just worrying about themselves, their money needs to support parents and grandparents. Many are deciding this burden is too big to bear, leading to a phenomenon called lying flat. Young people opting out of high-pressure jobs altogether. Youth unemployment quietly surged past 21% before the government stopped publishing the data in 2023. That's 1 in 5 young people with no job, no income, and no clear path forward. The vicious cycle. All of this creates what economists call a deflationary spiral. Without consumption, companies stop investing. When companies stop investing, they stop hiring. When hiring freezes, unemployment rises. And when that happens, even more people stop spending. Household savings in China have hit a record high of over $20 trillion, more than the entire GDP of the European Union. Despite government efforts including interest rate cuts, tax breaks and bank lending programs, people simply won't spend. Experts estimate that long-term household consumption growth will slow to just 3 to 4% per year over the next decade. This will contribute only about 1.5% to GDP growth annually, simply not enough to power a modern economy. The government is running out of options. The official budget deficit hit a record high in 2023 at over 4% of GDP. Local governments are deeply indebted, much of it tied to land sales that are drying up because nobody wants to build anymore. Global implications. Here's why this matters to everyone. China isn't just another economy. It's the second largest in the world, and everybody relies on what China makes. Nearly 30% of global manufacturing happens in China. It's the largest buyer of raw materials like iron, copper, and coal, and the biggest exporter of electronics, machinery, and everyday goods. China controls nearly 70% of global rare earth metal exports, materials essential for everything from electric vehicles to military equipment. When a machine this big starts to seize up, the rest of the system feels it. Global supply chains are already being hit. Fewer factories running in China means fewer parts for manufacturers in Germany, Mexico, or Vietnam. But there's another side to this story. China's export boom is creating tensions worldwide. The US is already closing off its markets, and countries like Brazil, Indonesia, and India are fearing the demise of their own industries, which can't compete with heavily subsidized Chinese firms. China's debt-to-GDP ratio is once again rapidly rising and is now even higher than the United States when accounting for household, corporate, and government debt combined. This cannot continue indefinitely. So what's the verdict on China's bizarre boom? Both crisis and miracle stories are true simultaneously. China's consumers and property markets are struggling like Japan in the 1990s. But unlike Japan, China's industries are thriving thanks to massive state support. This creates an economy that defies conventional wisdom, one where domestic crisis coexists with export dominance, where saving rates hit record highs while manufacturing breaks new ground. The Chinese government faces a critical choice: rebuild confidence by creating real social safety nets and shifting power toward households, or continue propping up a system that looks strong on the outside but is slowly sinking from within. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: an economy as big as China's doesn't need to crash to cause a global crisis. It just needs to stop growing. And that's exactly what's starting to happen. What do you think? Can China escape this economic paradox, or are we witnessing the beginning of the end for the world's second largest economy? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most fascinating economic stories.